Now today, the talk is going to be on this fascinating, I would say, subject of portraiture, right, or the portrait. Okay, and I think it's a fascinating subject because, whenever we encounter someone, right, now the first thing that you notice, okay, is the face of the person, right, the beauty or the ugliness of that person, okay, which can attract or repulse you, you know what I mean? Okay, and then sometimes we go further, okay, and through the face we try to discern the mood, the character, and the personality of the person. Okay, and so certain cultures have developed this art of what they call physiognomy, okay, the art of reading faces, right? So, artists, good portrait artists, okay, are the ones who are not only able to capture the external appearance of a person, right, of an individual, but the interior reality, right, the inner character of that person, okay, and to capture what they call the soul of that person. So I titled this, the title for this talk, Mirrors of the Soul, right? And as you know, what's the most famous work of art today? What's the most famous work of art? Right? It's the Mona Lisa. It's a portrait, right? So that's why the portrait holds a kind of a special fascination for us, okay? And we'll see why in this talk, right? So I'm not going to take a kind of chronological look into the history of portraiture. Okay, rather I want to kind of deal first with the definition of what the portrait is, and then I will be talking about the different formats of portraiture, and lastly on the function of portraiture, right, in history. Okay, and in the process also I'll be talking a little bit about the history as well, right, of the portrait. Yes, and portraiture, it says, is one of the most perplexing and complex genres of representation, right? I mean, to you, right, it's or to many people, right, the portrait may just seem to be capturing the likeness, the physical appearance of someone, right? But it's much more complex than that. As I said, a good portraitist is someone who is able to capture the soul of the sitter, right? The sitter is someone who poses, right, for the portrait. And we see that, of course, in the most famous work of art, all right, today, which is the Mona Lisa. Right? Now, you may ask yourself, after so many years, right, why does the Mona Lisa continue to fascinate us? Right? Anyone wants to give some, answers or response to that? Certain mystery. Yeah, that word, the key word is mystery, Okay, but we just want to know what that mystery is, right? Any other views? So what's so mysterious about this? Do you want to kind of elaborate on, right? What's so mysterious about this portrait? I mean, it's just a representation.
I don't really know what she's thinking. There is that slight hint of a smile there, but it's not necessarily a smile that immediately connotes happiness. One doesn't really know what's behind that.
Right. Yeah, the rest all agree. I see nods, you're nodding. Right. It's very intriguing portrait, I must say, right? And the smile is elusive. I have to agree with you, I mean, it could be a smile. It might not be a smile, right? Okay, so I suppose, Leonardo is someone who has really studied, or he believes that a good portrait artist should be someone who is able to capture the inner character, right, of the individual. And that's what he's trying to do here with this portrait, right? And you're right. I mean, even after all these years, right? Okay, we are debating about, this painting, right? Okay, not so much about the identity of the sitter, because the identity is still more or less, still debatable. But I would say the actual mood, the actual emotional state of this, individual, right? Is she really smiling? Right? And Leonardo used certain techniques, right, to impart ambiguity to this portrait. Okay, one of the techniques that he used is called sfumato, S-F-U-M-A-T-O. Right, sfumato is Italian for smokiness, and you can see the use of sfumato, right? It's like a shadow, at the corners of the eyes and the corners of the mouth. Okay, and that imparts a certain ambiguity to the mood of this, this figure here, this individual, right? Okay, and it's said that if you look at the eyes of the Mona Lisa, right, and it seems to follow you, right, everywhere that that you walk. Okay, so so this is an example of how complex a portrait can be, right? It's just not a straightforward capturing of a likeness of a person, of an individual. Okay, so we have so the definition of a portrait, I would say, is not so straightforward. Okay, now the Oxford Dictionary, okay, describes a portrait or defines a portrait as such: a painting, drawing, or photograph of person, especially of the face. Okay, I don't know whether that's that is a sufficient definition of a portrait. Okay, of course today it's no longer limited to just this medium, right? Painting, drawing, or photograph. Okay, there could be other mediums as well. Okay, right. I mean, an artist could use, for example, a video, okay, to capture the portrait of someone. And does the face have to be the focal point of a portrait? Okay, if you look at this particular work, okay, by Anton Cataldo, right? It's called Pit Seated. Okay, here you have the sitter with his back turned towards us. So you don't get to see the face at all, right? So if the portrait is defined by, the capturing of the physical appearance, the face of a person, then this doesn't qualify as a portrait. Or does it? Okay, do you think it qualifies as a portrait? Okay, but again, it depends on what we mean by likeness. Okay, does likeness have to be associated with the face? Or can it be associated with other parts of the body? Right? So when we look at this person, even with his back turned to us, we can recognize who this person is without looking at the face. Okay, so in that sense, this becomes a portrait. Right? So you see contemporary artists trying to challenge, okay, the definition of what a portrait should be. Likewise, this very famous series of works it's now become a very famous series of work, okay, by this Filipino artist called Poklong Ananding. How many of you have seen this work? Yes, right? Okay, I think it's been shown at the Singapore Museum, and I think Art Stage, right, as well. So Ananding, what he did, he's like a street photographer, right? He will go to the streets, not only in the Philippines, okay, but in the places in which he traveled, right? And then he would, I don't know whether he picked the subject at random, right? Okay, but he would photograph, okay, someone who is standing on the streets. Okay, but here, right, the face is now being replaced by a constellation or a flash of light, right? Okay, so you see here what the artist is trying to do is that he's trying to subvert the relationship between the artist and the sitter. Okay, because this relationship is very important, right, in portraiture, right? But the artist here is subverted, because what causes that flash of light, okay, is the circular mirror that is held by the sitter, by the subject, right? Okay, that's then reflected back, okay, when the photograph, right, was being taken, right? Now, I won't dwell into the meaning of this work, right? Some say that it's a social critique, okay, because the subjects that that constitute this series of works are ordinary people, okay, probably people in the streets, street vendors and all that, and you can tell by the kind of clothes that they wear. okay, that gives us a hint as to their social status. Okay, it could be a reference to religion, I mean, the flash of light could be a kind of a halo, right? A halo, right? But I think whatever it is, right, here you have an artist who's trying to subvert the kind of, the usual process of portraiture, right? Okay, the kind of negotiation between the artist and the sitter. And also, he has subverted the gaze of the viewer, right? So much so that, we cannot look at see the face of this, right, this subject. Okay, so our gaze, has been subverted, right? Now, I have this question here. Does a portrait include representations of animals? Okay, how many of you here think that, nowadays, you have services that, right, that offer, portraits of your pet dog, your cat, or your hamster, right? But can we seriously call them portraits? Okay, these paintings of, your pet, whatever it is, right? A dog, a cat, or, right, a rabbit, right? Do you all think that, can that really qualify as a portrait? Now, how many of you think that it can? You do? Okay, you too. Right. I would like to hear your views, why do you think, you can consider, paintings of animals, your pet rather, not any other, animal to be a portrait.
I would say because the pet's animate.
Right.
It's not an object, it's a being.
Okay. It's not an object, but a being. Right. That's interesting, I thought. Okay, that's an interesting response. Okay. Any other kind of views about this? Okay, I have another definition from Oxford Dictionary, all right, the concise Oxford Dictionary, that says a portrait is defined as a likeness of person or animal made by drawing, painting, photography, etc. Okay, and and some writers have accepted that a likeness of an animal can qualify as a portrait. Okay, but can it really qualify as a portrait? You all seen this very recent photograph? Okay, apparently it's a selfie taken by what species of monkey is this? Okay, anyway, it's a monkey, right? If I'm not mistaken. Okay, but anyway, it was taken in Indonesia, where this particular monkey stole the camera, okay, of this photographer, and and use it to take hundreds of pictures. And when the photographer examined, what has been taken, okay, these two, kind of stood up. These two photographs, okay, which look like a selfie. Okay. Now the question is that, when did the monkey consciously took, right, a photograph of himself or herself? Okay, is he really posing, right, for the camera? Okay, that's a question. Or is this just an accidental shot? Okay, it looks like the monkey is posing. He has a big grin, right? Okay, right. Or it could just be accidental. I'm not sure. Okay, it looks like it is a pose shot. Okay, definitely. Okay, it looks like it. All right. Okay, how about this? Okay, before that, okay, Cynthia Freeland in a book on portraits, okay, she gave 3 conditions for something to qualify as a portrait. Okay, first condition is recognizable physical body. Okay, meaning to say individual likeness. Now, let's say you have a pet chihuahua, all right, and if you put your pet chihuahua among 100 other chihuahuas, would you be able to recognize your pet chihuahua among the hundreds of other chihuahuas? You would be able to. Okay, I wouldn't argue with that, right? Okay, because some owners think that they can, kind of identify, right, their pet. Okay, now for the higher order of animals, we can do that. But for the lower orders of animals like snakes and insects, it's a bit more difficult to do, right? Although some beekeepers, will argue that they can identify, right? Okay, the certain bees among there, right? Okay, but yes, okay, so we would say that, well, I think animals have certain individual likenesses that we can recognize. Okay, how about inner life, like consciousness, mental awareness? Okay, this is a bit debatable. Okay, does an animal have a consciousness? Okay, and consciousness has been linked by some philosophers with the soul. Okay, and some philosophers have denied that animals have a soul. Okay, or have an inner state. Right? Okay, and the question is that, can an animal reason? Can an animal, suffer pain and experience pleasure? Right? Can an animal kind of, have moral consideration? Right? You would argue again that yes, animals do have, or an animal does have consciousness. Right? Okay, because because when a portrait is being painted of someone, okay, the artist must be able to capture the inner character, the inner state of that person. Okay, so if the animal does not have that inner state, okay, then the portraitist cannot capture that, the interior reality. Okay. Okay, so but we kind of agree that, or even Cynthia Freeland agrees that these two, kind of fulfill the conditions for portrait. Okay, but there's a third condition. And she says that animals do not fulfill the third condition, that of the factor of posing or self-representation. Okay, so it comes back to that selfie taken by the monkey. Okay, is the monkey really posing for the camera? Okay, now is the animal, right? Okay, for example, very human-like expression you see there. Okay, it's as if this orangutan, okay, called Rocky, is posing for the camera. But is it really posing for the camera? Is Rocky aware that, he's having his portrait, taken? Okay, right? Can he say after that, doesn't really look like me, right? Okay, right? Okay, so that's the crucial question, right? Does an animal have a concept? Okay, I mean, do they become active participants in the portraiture process, in the process of having the portrait painted? Right? Okay, that's a crucial question. Right? Do you still agree with that? That they are active participants in that process?
So you can make the same argument about a baby.
Okay.
Does a baby know that their portrait is being made? Can they say, that doesn't look like me? They haven't developed that level of consciousness yet, but if it were a baby, we would still say it's a portrait.
Right. Okay. But then again, one can argue that, there are not many paintings of babies, right? Or there are not many portraits of babies. Okay, maybe photographs, yes, but, actual paintings, if you look at it. Okay, and because, I think a portraitist or an artist will find it extremely challenging, right, to paint, to do a portrait of a baby, because as you said, you don't have that kind of negotiation between the artist and the sitter, right? Okay, but anyway, I have no answer for this. Okay, I have no definite answer. Okay, but some artists seem to be convinced, and artists have done drawings and paintings of their own pets. Okay, like for example, David Hockney. Okay, the pop artist, the British pop artist. Okay, and he says that somehow they seem to know that a picture is being made. Okay, so so you have an artist himself saying this. Okay, that his pets, right, like his pet dog, okay, is aware of having his portrait painted or drawn. Okay, so I think I want to leave this. I have no kind of conclusive answer for this. Okay, but I think it's important to make us ponder, right? Okay, about what a portrait is, and that the definition of portrait itself is quite elusive, right? Okay, as I mentioned, a portrait is judged in part on how closely it resembles the appearance of the subject. Okay, but portraits are not only limited to recreating external appearances, right, but also portraying a range of qualities of an individual or group. Okay, so this would include the personality, the character of the sitter, and it also include the qualities of that individual. And the qualities of that individual, are conveyed through things like objects, that you see within the picture itself. Like, let's say it's a painting, the props, the background, okay, right, can convey the status of that person. Okay, well, I'll be talking about it, as we go along. Okay, Richard Lindner, who is a painter himself, he says, one doesn't paint what someone looks like, but what effect he has. Right? And one must always bear this in mind when we look at a portrait. Okay? So a portrait, in any case, we cannot compare what we see in a portrait and what the actual person looks like, because most of the people are, have passed away since. Okay, but more importantly, what effect he has, right? Even though the portrait is 500 to 600 years old, okay, we continue to be fascinated by the portrait, okay, because the person who is having his or her portrait painted wants to convey certain qualities, right? Okay, and wants to, and that would have an effect on how we look at a person. So I would say that portraiture can be described as a visual representation of individual people distinguished by references to the sitter's status and character. Right. But is this definition sufficient? Okay, and some of the earliest writings on painting suggest that a portrait should attempt more than simply representing the sitter's outward appearance. Okay, and already in the ancient Greeks and Romans, okay, make it clear that even, an artist was expected to try to paint the sitter's soul. Now, how do you capture the sitter's soul? Right? Okay, now a skilled portraitist can capture subtleties of physical appearances, right? Like asymmetries of the corners of the mouth and things like that. Okay, but to be able to capture the sitter's soul, that takes a lot of skill, right? Takes a lot of skill. But some artists have, they were able to do that. Like, later on we're going to look at this artist called Titian, right? Titian was a really skilled portraitist, right, who was able to give an insight into the character, right, of his sitter. Okay, so some artists, they are able to capture the so-called the soul or the inner character of that person or the individual. Okay, and Van Gogh says, portraiture with the thought, the soul of the model in it, that is what I think must come. Okay? And we know that the eyes. Okay, now when you look at a portraiture, right? I think the most prominent part of a portrait when you look at it, really are the eyes. Okay, I mean, a skilled portraitist who is able to capture the penetrating gaze of a sitter, can afford us an insight into the soul of the sitter, right? Because it's really the eyes that I mean, there's a saying that the eyes are what? Yeah, okay, are can't remember. Sorry. Window, okay. Okay. The eyes are window to the soul, okay. Right. So, and an artist who is able, who are able a skilled artist, I would say, a portraitist, able to convey the character through the eyes, okay, of the sitter, okay. Like Steve McCurry. Okay, you have seen this very famous photograph, okay, called Afghan Girl. This was done some time back. I mean, that was 30 years ago, okay. And this photograph was taken. I mean, she was 12 years old then, all right? She was in a refugee camp in Pakistan. Okay, at that time, there was the Afghan war happening, all right? Okay, and here, I mean, this has become one of the most probably the most recognizable photograph or image of National Geographic. Okay, and what is so, I would say, what captures you about this particular photograph are the eyes of of this girl here, right? I mean, she wears a red scarf over her head, okay, but her piercing sea green eyes, right? Okay, simply, right, draws your attention, right? Okay, and I mean, one might be able to read, her emotional state, okay, her kind of her inner state through the eyes, right? Okay, so this has become a very iconic photograph, and later on they managed to locate, right, the Afghan Girl. I think that was only in 2002, right, that they were able to locate her. But again here, I just want to emphasize, right, that the eyes, okay, are one of the most important, part when it comes to, painting the portrait of someone, okay, of an individual, or even in a photograph like this. Now, I mentioned about likeness earlier, okay, and I said that likeness is not altogether satisfactory, okay, in measuring whether something is a portrait or not, because some portraits are not likenesses, and not all likenesses are portraits. Okay, what do I mean by this? Okay, for example, before the Renaissance, okay, you have, for example, in Europe, okay, you have so-called portraits of rulers, kings and queens. Okay, and for example, in China, you also have the so-called portraits of emperors. Okay, but if you look at them, they somehow look alike. Okay, because they are not really portraits of individuals. They are actually types, T-Y-P-E-S. Okay, so they are types. Okay, and types are, in a sense, meaning to say that they conform to certain conventional notions of what a ruler should look like. Okay, but they don't really capture the individual qualities or likeness of the ruler. So do you notice that when you look at emperors, I would say, even up to the Ming period, okay, Qing period, in Qing China, the emperor of Qianlong and Kangxi, right, they seem to capture an individual, person. But before then, the Song dynasty and the Tang, okay, if you look at the portraits of emperors, they look more or less, similar, right, somehow, okay. They're always quite corpulent and, right, and they have certain qualities, okay. And not all likenesses are portraits. For example, in Renaissance Italy, right, you have paintings, narrative paintings, for example, religious paintings, okay, where you can recognize the portraits of certain famous people, normally the donors or patrons who commission the portraits, who commission the painting. But can these likenesses be considered to be portraits? Okay, probably not. Okay, because they are just characters within the narrative. Okay. Now let me challenge you more by looking at this work. Okay, talking about likenesses. Is this a likeness of, right, Emperor Rudolf II? Okay, this is a very famous series of work by Giuseppe Asimboldo. Okay, it's part of his, he has two series. One is called The Four Elements, and then The Four Seasons. Right, and Asimboldo actually worked for the Habsburg court. Right, he worked actually for Rudolf II as well as his father. Okay, but here, right, he did this, and he's famous for this portraits of what he called composite heads. And he uses flowers and plants and fruits as well as marine creatures, okay, to form the composite heads of certain individuals and rulers, right? Now, what would the emperor think, of this portrait? Okay, obviously the emperor has a sense of humor, all right, or else Asimboldo would have, right? I don't know, were gone into trouble or something, you know, or even executed. And Arcibaldo himself had a sense of humor, and this was appreciated by the emperor himself, okay? Because the Habsburg court, okay, was considered to be quite avant-garde. Okay, it welcomed, you know, artists who were prepared to break the boundaries, right? Okay, so Arcibaldo, as a court artist, he did things like he designed whimsical devices, you know, costumes for festivals. Okay, and he did all sorts of things like this. Okay, so this work of the emperor, as you can see, okay, consists of different vegetables and fruits, you know, pea pods for the eyebrows, what else? Corns for ears, gods for the forehead, right? Okay, but, you know, really when you look at this work, it is quite witty. I mean, it's humorous, okay, but it also tries to capture, I won't say the likeness, I mean, it does, in fact, have a likeness of the emperor, okay, but what it also intends to capture is the quality of the emperor, okay, because here is Vertumnus. Now, Vertumnus is actually the Roman god, okay, the Roman god of plant life, of the seasons, okay, and of the harvest, okay, and Vertumnus was said to be able to change his form at will. Okay, so in the end, if you look at this portrait itself, it's a metaphor, it's an allegorical portrait. It captures certain qualities of the emperor. Okay, I mean, it talks about abundance, about harvest. That's how the emperor wants people to look at him. Okay, or at his rule, or of his rule rather. Okay, that you know, there's abundance. You know, I mean, his rule, there's a kind of a copiousness and abundance, right, during his reign. And he also speaks of the emperor's own, you know, varied activities and his spheres of influence. Okay, so this kind of portrait itself, okay, consisting of vegetables and fruits, okay, it's actually an allegory, right, to refer to certain qualities of the emperor. Okay, suddenly, you know, this is, I would say, a real anomaly, right, and knowing that this was painted during the Renaissance, okay, and you know, makes it even more fascinating, right? Okay, you wouldn't find another kind of a similar work, right, during the Renaissance. And talking about likenesses, I mean, this work by Nam June Pak, right? Nam June Pak was considered to be the father of video art. Okay, and you know, he was one of the first people to use the portable video, okay, the Sony Portapack. Okay, and here, you know, he did a portrait, a so-called robotic sculpture. Okay, he's famous also for his robotic sculptures like this, consisting of television sets. Okay, he's one of the first artists to use the television sets as a medium, artistic medium. Okay, and in this work, okay, he did a so-called portrait of his good friend, Joseph Beuys. Okay, Joseph Beuys is one of the pioneer performance artists, right, German performance artists. Okay, and how do we know that this work represents Beuys? Precisely his felt hat. Okay, Beuys always goes around with his felt hat. Okay, so when we are talking about likeness, right, there may not be a physical likeness. Okay, but the likeness here is conveyed, right, through the hat, right, through the felt hat. Okay, that was, you know, that was always worn by the artist. Okay. And Umberto Boccioni, one of the leading members of the futurist movement, right, he says this: in order for a portrait to be a work of art, it must not resemble the sitter. Okay. And I would say this, that, you know, unlike a camera, okay, painters have always brought their own interpretation to the depiction of a subject. So that is why even with the advent of photography, okay, which at one point seemed to have spelled the end of painting, right? Painting still continued to thrive. Okay, it's because, you know, if you paint a subject, okay, you are able to bring your own interpretation to bear, right, on how you know, capture, right? The subtleties of the subject. Okay, whether it's physical appearance or the inner, right, character of that person, which a photograph, I would say, cannot do, as much. Okay, and it's difficult to say how closely a portrait resembles the sitter. Okay, and and I think with the advent again of photography, and especially today with the mass media and social media, we tend to compare what we see, right, in photographs with the painted portrait. Okay, but I must say that really when an artist sought to paint, right, an individual, right, he wouldn't, I will say that capturing a likeness would be the least kind of important consideration, right, for the artist. Okay. But later on, we're going to have a few examples, right, on this, certain controversial examples. Okay, because artists can interpret the same subject in different ways. Artists can, and you'll see later on, I'll show you, artists painting the same individual, but in different ways. And sometimes it's in the asymmetries and irregularities that likenesses are caught. Okay, and these are slightly exaggerated and overemphasized to secure a resemblance. And we can see this in the art of caricature. All right? And as you know, caricature exaggerates the most distinctive feature, right, of an individual. Okay, so on the left, you recognize that as Saddam Hussein. How do you know it's Saddam Hussein? His mustache. And anything else? Sorry? Oh, right, that's right. And his rather large nose. Yes, that's right. Okay, right. And Obama, right? What's the most distinctive feature of Obama? His ears and his smile. Right. Okay, so that's okay. So, but this is an example of a caricature which exaggerates, certain distinctive features of the individual. Okay, so although the caricaturist has distorted the figure, but yet we are able to recognize, okay, the figure itself through the distinctive features. And certain artists have done this. For example, Modigliani. Okay, Modigliani was an Italian artist, and he's most famous for his very erotic and languorous kind of nudes. Okay, and he's most famous also for portraits of people, like fellow artists. Okay, like this particular work of Chiam Sutin. Right, and if you compare the photograph and sometimes, as I said, it's difficult to compare the photograph and the painted portrait because, as I said, not all artists sought to capture the likeness. Okay, in the case of Modigliani, what he did was that, he wanted to exaggerate certain features of Sutin in the work. Okay, so in many of his portraits, right, he would depict his sitters with elongated necks, right, and attenuated forms. Okay, but yet being able to retain a certain likeness of that person. Okay, so although this painting is on the brink of caricature, still I think we are able to recognize, right, the subject itself. Okay. Likewise with these two works. Same subject, painted by Peter Paul Rubens, okay, but done 10 years apart. Okay, but 10 years is not, simply a difference of 10 years wouldn't really make, a lot of difference in the way you look, I suppose. Okay, but here you see that these two individuals seem really to be like different people. Okay, but then again, they might look like different people to you, but again, as I said, like caricature, right, certain distinctive features of, of their physical appearance are retained, okay, by the artists, right? The two artists, right, they are two different artists painting the same subject, all right? And you can see that the interpretation is quite different, but as I mentioned, they, certain distinctive features of this individual can be recognized. Anyone can tell me what, right? The distinctive feature, the nose. Okay, what in particular with the nose? The kink. It's called the kink, yes. Or the bridge of the nose, the kink. Okay, anything else? Yes, the elongated features as well, I suppose. Okay, but again, the elongated feature is quite interesting because you look at both artists, how they interpret it. Okay, for Rubens, the individual looks, I mean, this portrait of Thomas Howard looks a bit more rugged, a bit more raw, whereas the one painted by Daniel Mittens look a bit more refined, a bit more elegant. Okay, right? So you can see how, the artist can paint the same subject differently. Okay, but yet being able to retain certain distinctive features of that subject, right? Anything else you want to add? Right? I think it's quite fascinating. Okay, the notion of likeness also assumes some degree of difference between the portrait image and the person, right? As I think we have seen that. Okay, and the degree of resemblance sufficient to establish a likeness is open to dispute. Not only about how much, but also about how little can be permitted, and the image still claimed as a portrait. Okay, so we are talking about the degree of resemblance here, right? How much can be permitted, how much can be left out, okay? And that person still being able to, retain a likeness or resemblance with, right? I mean the painting itself, retaining a likeness with the actual, the actual physical appearance of that person. And we can see this here in this very controversial painting done by Lucian Freud. Okay, and if you're familiar with Lucian Freud's work, okay, you know that he paints or he painted mainly nudes, right? Mainly portraits of his close friends and relatives. Okay, and Freud, he's able to bring out the fleshiness and the corporeal qualities of his sitters, okay, through the beauty of his paintwork. Okay, that's why he's so admired and he's considered to be one of the best painters in the second half of the 20th century. Right, one of the best oil painters. Okay, one of the best portraitists. And so, when the Queen wanted a portrait to be painted, who did they go to? The best painter in Britain, Lucian Freud. Okay, without a doubt. Okay, because at that time he was still the greatest living painter. He has since passed on. Okay, but what was the result? There you have it on the left. Okay, right. And I have a photograph of the Queen at the bottom for you to compare it with, right? Okay, I don't know whether it's a fair comparison, but do you all see the resemblance between the two? Right, I'm not sure. Okay, but when the portrait was first unveiled, it divided critics. Right, it divided critics. I don't know what the Queen, thought of it. Okay, but certainly, there's one critic who says that, when you look at this portrait of the Queen, it looks like she has a texture of putty on her face, P-U-T-T-Y, putty, okay? And her chin has a kind of a 6 o'clock shadow around her. Right? Okay, but I suppose when you commission a person like Freud to paint your portrait, this is what you expect. Because the artist is trying to bring, he's not going to, again, it depends on negotiation between the sitter and the artist. Okay, but 20th century artists, seem to paint according to their own style. Right? Rather than trying to flatter the sitter. It's not a very flattering portrait, let me tell you, right? The sweet-looking Queen here, has been transformed into, right, that painting over there. And I also put side by side with this painting a self-portrait of Lucian Freud himself. Okay, can you see the resemblance? Okay, it probably has more resemblance with Lucian Freud's self-portrait than with, right, the actual appearance of the Queen. And he said that when, an artist paints someone, he would put something of himself within that, right? Within that portrait. And if you look at it, well, it could be, right? It could be quite true. Right? So it's interesting. It's a very controversial, as I said, portrait. But as far as I know, they didn't destroy it. Okay? Unlike the next work. Okay, this is a work by Graeme Sutherland, right? And Graeme Sutherland was also known at that time to be one of the best portraitists, in the UK. And so, to commemorate Winston Churchill's 80th birthday, the Houses of Parliament commissioned a portrait to be done of Winston Churchill, and they got Graeme Sutherland to paint the portrait. Okay, and so the result is what you see there. Okay, it's quite similar to the Lincoln statue, right? Okay, I think it's in Washington, right? You see Lincoln, seated with both his hands on the chair rest. Okay, when Winston Churchill first saw this portrait, he hated it. Okay, because it says it shows him, as a grumpy old man, and with a scowl on his face, right? Okay, and he absolutely wanted to have nothing to do with his portrait. Okay, but there was a presentation ceremony, and he didn't want this portrait to be there. But in the end, they persuaded him that it's important for this portrait, okay, to be there at the presentation ceremony. All right, and his wife also kind of disliked it, and in the end, it was never displayed in the family home. Right, it was never displayed, and then I think we are not sure, but later on, of course, they found out that the painting had been destroyed by his wife. Okay, because I think she probably couldn't stand her husband suffering anymore by looking at this portrait. Okay, right? But I don't know. If you look at it, Sutherland actually captures with frankness and candor, right? This of Winston Churchill. I mean, although Winston Churchill can be witty as well, right? But if you look at if you have ever seen photographs of Winston Churchill and and on television and all that, I suppose it does bear a good resemblance, right, with Winston Churchill. Okay, so sometimes it's interesting that yourself, right, the person being painted, okay, don't see that it resembles, right, you, but to other people it might it might be different. Okay. Oh, so this is a quotation by Winston Churchill. Okay. Here sits an old man on his stool. It makes me look half-witted, which I ain't. Okay, so I suppose he wants to appear more witty, right? Okay, and but anyway, as I said, it makes him look like a grumpy old man. Okay, sometimes although catching a likeness often depends upon distortion, in some cases we find a likeness surviving despite distortion. Okay, and the famous art historian Gombrich says, okay, for it is really the perception of likeness for which we are originally programmed. Okay, but the noticing of unlikeness which stands out and sticks in the mind. Okay, notice that the noticing of unlikeness, right, that the departure from the norm which stands out and sticks in the mind. Okay, this is a work by Francis Bacon. Okay, now Francis Bacon is a contemporary of Lucian Freud. Okay, they were good friends. Okay, you can see that they both have kind of similar approach to painting in some ways. Okay, because if you know Francis Bacon's work, anyway, he holds a world record today. Okay, for his I think one of his triptych. Okay, right. So, in any case, he's famous for this very deformed, disfigured paintings, right? Of his, he normally paints, his close friends, right? And His paintings are commentary. It's a commentary on the condition, the human condition. Okay, he was also affected by the horrors he witnessed in World War II. Okay, and he also was influenced by the images he sees, of skin diseases and animal slaughterhouses. Okay, also all that form kind of influence, how Bacon, portrayed his subjects. Okay, so in this case, this is a portrait of, it's called the head of a woman. Okay, but this woman has been identified as Muriel Belcher. Okay, and Muriel Belcher was this very temperamental, I would say, woman who used to run a pub in Soho in London. Okay, and one of her frequent customers was Francis Bacon. Okay, and one day she made a kind of a bargain with him that she would give him £10 and free drinks, if he's able to bring a new customer to a pub, right? Okay, so here, and so there was a relationship between, the artist and the sitter, right? So you see here, what do you see here? I mean, you see a badly disfigured face, right? As if it's being mauled by something, right? Okay, it's a badly mauled, badly disfigured face. But do you still see that the artist has retained a likeness of Muriel Belcher? Where do you see that? You don't see it at all. Okay, but I only see it in the hairstyle. Okay, right? Can you see that? The hairstyle of the sitter and the painted portrait, right? It's difficult for you probably to see a resemblance here. Okay, but Bacon himself said that he wanted to distort the thing far beyond appearance, but in the distortion to bring it back to a recording of appearance. So that's quite interesting. Okay, I don't know what Belcher thought about this portrait. Right, it would have been interesting to hear what she would have thought about it. Likewise, with Picasso. Okay, this work. He did a painting of Ambroise Volat. Now, Volat was a very important person in early modern art. Okay, he was the one. He was an art dealer. Okay, and he was the one who promoted the works of people like Paul Cézanne and also Picasso. Okay, and Picasso, of course, this is his signature works, which involve the fragmentation of the subject into what they call many cube-like, kind of forms. Okay, so much so that we are able to see the subject from simultaneous angles. Okay, but Picasso is so skillful that here he's able to retain, right, the likeness of, of the subject. Okay, and I've put a photograph beside it. Okay, and you can see that he's able to capture some of the distinctive features of the subject. So you can see here that likeness is still retained despite distortion. Okay, so here we see, right, the the forehead of Volat, okay, and other distinctive features still being retained, okay, by the artist despite the fragmentation, the distortion, okay, that we see in this painting. Okay, let me go on now to the formats of portraits. Okay, so first you have the profile view. Now, the profile view essentially reduces the face to a single outline. Okay, and it provides no opportunity at all for a kind of a psychological connection between the viewer and the, right, and the subject itself. Okay, so, and many of these so-called profile portraits were influenced by the Roman coins. Okay, and you can see that, in these Roman coins, you have profile images of the emperors. Okay, and the Romans really introduced realism into art. Okay, they were probably the first people to introduce realism into art. So when you look at their portraits of emperors, okay, they actually are likenesses of the emperors. Okay, for example, Nero will always be shown with a rather big kind of neck. Okay, so certain emperors have certain characteristics, right? And this profile portrait was revived during the Renaissance. Okay, actually it was this artist called Pisanello with his portrait medals, okay, that popularized this, the profile portrait. Okay, and it became very popular during the early Renaissance in works like this, okay, by this, this artist called Piero della Francesca, right, of the Duke and Duchess of Urbino. At that time, the court of Urbino was considered to be the leading cultural center in Italy. Okay, so here you see the Duke. This is a diptych. Okay, so you see the Duke here and the Duchess facing each other in profile. Right, here the artists, and they are both. We can tell again by the way they dress. Okay, that that shows their dignity and their nobility. Okay, you can see that the Duke is dressed in a what you call a biretta with a white crown and a matching top coat. Okay, while the Duchess is dressed, she's dressed quite elaborately as well, right, with a very elaborate headdress, as well as pearls and fine cut jewels. Right? But I want you to take note of the Duke, right? The Duke, you can see, I would say it's only practical for him to have his portrait painted in profile, okay, because he actually lost his right eye. Okay, I'm not sure whether in battle or whether he's in training, but he lost his right eye. And he also wounded or injured his nose. Okay, so it was only, I would say, practical for him to be shown in profile. Okay, so here you see the Duke. You can see his kind of stern simplicity, right, that he portrays, or rather that he projects in this portrait. Okay, but a portrait is also more than just capturing the likeness of individuals. In this case, the background is very important. If you look at the background, what do you see there? Right, and this is done again using perspective. Okay, you see the land, right? That's the land. You see ships, you see fortifications. Okay, and all that land belonged, right, to the court of Urbino, belonged to the Duke and the Duchess. Okay. And then you have the frontal view. Now, the frontal view was still very unusual during this time. Okay, in fact, during the Renaissance. In fact, in the 16th century, it's still very rare to have frontal views of, people painted. Okay, in fact, during the medieval period, the only images that have frontal views are actually images of Christ. Right? You'll see medieval rulers and all that, having their portraits painted in a profile view rather than a frontal view. So, in fact, it was very bold for Albrecht Dürer to have his portrait painted in a frontal view, because this kinds of format, this frontal format, was only reserved for images of Christ. Okay, but the question is whether Dürer himself sees himself as Christ-like. Okay, and some commentators seem to think so. Okay, that this portrait is actually a visual representation of what you call the imitation of Christ. Okay, later on I think made popular in a book by Thomas Kempis. Okay, and in a sense to follow the example of Christ. Okay, so it could be that. It could be a kind of a visual representation of in the imitation of Christ. Or it could be that Dürer wanted to show that he has God-like abilities as an artist. Okay, and that he's actually on par with God as a creator. Okay, as an artist. Okay, but if you look at it, well, if you look at this portrait, Dürer, this is a self-portrait. Okay, and if you look at this self-portrait, you can see that Dürer is very aware of his fashionable good looks, undoubtedly. Okay, and he's wearing a fur-lined kind of, costume. Okay, and that goes against the kind of modesty and austerity, okay, preached in the, the imitation of Christ. Okay, so, right, so, but here, obviously he wants to show himself as, as Christ-like, right? Because if you compare this with medieval images, you can see similarities. in the brown parting hair, the long locks, you know, with the parting in the middle, the mustache, okay, and the beard, and the gesture of the right hand, okay, right. And if we look at the inscription, it says, "I, Albrecht Dürer, portray myself in everlasting colors, aged 28 years." Okay, so I think this is more bordering on narcissism than anything else, right? This particular portrait. Okay. All right. And again, you know, full-face portraits will emphasize asymmetries of the features and the particularities of the eyes and the mouth. Okay, and the asymmetries are, you know, if you look at this portrait, okay, if you look at the face itself, it's divided, right, into two halves, and the two halves of the face don't seem too similar, right? The artist sort of emphasized the asymmetries between the two parts of, right, of the face there. And this is the three-quarter profile view is one of the most challenging formats, right, for the artist to paint. Okay, because here is both a combination of both the profile view and the full frontal view, right? Okay, and it allows for contact with the viewer. Okay, the play upon the feature, the features asymmetries and the description of the nose profile. Okay, now this is a portrait by Raphael portrait of Serry, Castiglione, who was a courtier. A courtier was a courtly gentleman, and he wrote this book called The Book of the Courtier. Okay, in which he sets out the qualities of a courtier, a courtly gentleman. Okay, and he says that a courtly gentleman should have qualities like distinguished aloofness, emotional self-restraint, okay, and he must avoid exaggeration at all costs, like having very showy or colorful clothes. Okay, and I think if you look at this very fine, insightful portrait, okay, you can see that, you know, Castiglione is trying to live up, right, you know, to what he preached. Okay, because here, if you look at it, you know, I think here one of the distinctive features are the eyes. Okay, he meets our gaze in a very serious yet amiable way. Okay, and if you look at it, you know, he wears a rather very somber, you know, I mean, his clothing isn't showy at all, right? It's very somber. And if you look at his hands, right, it shows self-restraint as well. Okay, so here you can see that, you know, Raphael has captured Castiglione in how he expects the role of a courtier, right, is to be fulfilled. Okay, and I think he was able to capture it quite brilliantly here in this portrait. This is full length. Okay, now to note that full length portraits are normally only reserved for royalty. Okay, royalty. And this is a portrait of Philip Prosper, okay, who was the son of, I believe it's Philip II, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, because Diego Velázquez was a court painter to Philip II. Okay, and he was commissioned to do this portrait. If you look at it, right, this portrait serves like a kind of a state portrait. Okay, this is Philip Prosper. It was done when he was 2 years old, and he died when he was 4 years old. Okay, now it's actually a boy, not a girl, right? Okay, and you can see that in terms of the pose, okay, you can see that this this heir to the throne, okay, you know, has poses with an outstretched arm, okay, and resting on the chair there. And that outstretched arm is actually a gesture of a king. Okay, it's a royal gesture, in fact. Okay, so when you read certain portraits, right, there are certain conventions that needed to be incorporated into the portrait. Okay, in this case, the outstretched arm. Okay, the chair, although it's like a child's chair, but the chair also serves like a kind of a throne. Okay, and then you see the curtain there, you know, the background, you know, there's this curtain, or, you know, and that curtain is also a symbol of power and grandeur as well. right? Now, one interesting thing you'll see in this portrait is if you look at the apron, right? He's wearing an apron, and on the apron you see various kind of objects. Now, those objects are actually amulets. Okay, and the amulets serve as a kind of sympathetic magic to protect him from the illnesses, in which he was suffering at that time. But unfortunately, as I said, 2 years later, okay, right, Philip Prosper actually died. Now, the equestrian portraits are figures on horseback, and they're actually quite rare. Okay, they're quite rare. And the equestrian portrait tradition actually started in Roman times. Okay, in Roman times. And of course, the horse itself, okay, has always been associated with royalty. Okay, and considered to be the privilege of royalty. Okay, the horse. Okay, and also, equestrian portraits can convey the power of the subject represented because it forces us to look up to the subject. Okay, to look up to the subject, right? And now this particular portrait is a portrait of Charles I, and it's painted by again one of the an artist, Anthony Van Dyck, okay, who specialized in painting portraits of rulers, in fact. And he paints the moment when Charles I, okay, actually emerged from a victory over the Protestant forces. Okay, at that time there was a battle between the Catholics and the Protestants. Okay, and here he shows the emperor in full armor. Okay, and again we must understand that as a prince and a king, okay, mastery of the art of war was one of the prerequisites. Okay, so here he shows the emperor in full armor carrying a lance on a mighty steed. Right? So, obviously, he wants this to be more than just, a portrait of an emperor. He wants to convey, the kind of the military resolve, the military prowess of the emperor himself. Right? And also the dark skies, that you see there, and the wooded areas you see there as well, okay, suggests, the emperor's resolve in the face of adversity, right? And also the emperor's ultimate victory. Okay, this is the last kind of part of my talk. I mean, I'm going to just tell you some of the functions of a portrait. Okay. I mean, first, a portrait is all about, or it can be about money, possession, status. Okay? And even a portrait like this that might seem to you to be just a painting of, well, maybe a landowner and his wife, in front of their estate, and that's about it. Okay, but some people have read now this is what they call the outer layer of painting. Okay, sometimes when we look at a painting, right, we have to peel out the outer layer and look at, and read the painting a bit more. Okay, so here you have the painting of Robert Andrews and his wife Frances. Okay, and it was done as a kind of a marriage portrait, I believe, right? A portrait to commemorate their wedding, their recent marriage. Okay, and it's really a marriage of wealth. Okay, this estate that you see there, right, that they are posing in front of, was actually given, or at least part of it was given to Robert as a dowry, okay, by the bride's father. Okay, I don't mind being given the estate, right? If you have, if you're very bad. That was given, part of the estate was given. So it's a combination of their fortune, right, into even bigger fortune, right? And if you look at, there's more to it than meets the eye. Okay, here you see, firstly, they are dressed quite fashionably. Okay, if you look at the Frances herself, the wife, she has a kind of a smirkness. There's a smirkness in how she looks. Okay, almost as if that she's looking down, right, on you. Okay, and the husband is posed with a hunting rifle and a hunting dog. Okay? And they are seated on a very fashionable Rococo-style bench, and they are seated on the edge of a wheat field. If you look at the wheat field on your right, you see that it's rather neat. There are neat rows of wheat field. And that again is, wants to convey that, that can only be achieved through modern machinery and technology. Right? Again, it's conveying their standing, their status. Right? Okay, that they were able to have access to this modern machinery. Okay, at that time, Jethro Tull's, invention of, I think, was it I can't remember what he invented, but anyway, there were some inventions during that time. So again, if you want to read further, that could be one interpretation of this painting, right? And of course, the land itself, okay, you can see that here the artist confines the couple to one corner, okay, and 3/4 of the painting is all about the land, okay, because here again, it conveys the vast wealth, okay, of this couple, right? So again, it's, as I said, it's sometimes a portrait, okay, can convey more than just the physical appearance. It can convey status and wealth. It can serve as a kind of a document, okay, and so here you have sometimes. Have you all seen this work? This is a very famous work, by the way, very iconic as well. Okay, by Dorothea Lange. It's called Migrant Mother. And this particular work, now Lange at that time, now this was done during the Great Depression. We are talking about 1930s in the US. Okay, and Lange actually worked for the Federal Resettlement Administration. Okay, and the federal, and what she was tasked with was that she was tasked with going around the rural areas to look at the impact of federal policies on rural conditions. Okay? So she happened to stumble upon this camp, okay, this camp for migrant farm laborers. And somehow, she recalled that, when she went to this camp, she was drawn to this woman somehow. Okay, so she was drawn to this woman and her children. And she had 7 children, okay, but only 3 are shown here. Okay, and she began to take pictures of this, mother here. And she showed me 3 of her kids. Okay, 2 of them with their backs turned to us, and they are one on each side of the mother, forming like the wings of an angel, right? Okay, and then she's carrying another child. Okay, but what's distinctive here again is the focal point of this painting is the face of the migrant mother. Okay, you can see, through the face, as I said, a photograph, I suppose, photographer can also capture certain subtleties as well, okay, of the face. Okay, so when we look at this face, she's not looking at us, but she's looking like, into the distance. Okay, we can read fear into it, anxiety, worry. Okay, but at the same time, this portrait is also about intimacy. It's about dependence. Her 2 children depending on her. Okay, her intimacy with her children. Right. So after this photograph was taken, Lange approached a newspaper editor, okay, who subsequently wrote an article with these images produced. Okay, and he also informed the federal authorities. Okay, because at that time there was little food available. They were in a sense starving. So after the story was published, 20,000 pounds of food, okay, was delivered to this camp. Right? So this remained, a very iconic picture, not only of the Depression years, but I think even today. Okay? Somehow certain paintings, certain photographs had a kind of timelessness, okay, to it. Okay, another one function is as commemoration, as memorial, okay, immortalizing the deceased. On the left is a sculpture, okay, of a Roman patrician carrying the bust of his ancestors. Now, it was a Roman custom at that time, okay, that whenever a family member died, okay, a bust would be made of that, of that family member. Okay, and then this bust will be kept in, like, I suppose, like a family cabinet. And then whenever another family member died, this will be taken out in the procession. Okay, and then, during the procession, this will be held, right? And then it will be carried along the procession. Now, what's the reason for this? Again, it's linked with wealth and status. Okay, to show people how influential or distinguished this particular family is. Okay? But it's also a way of, as I said, remembering or immortalizing the deceased. Okay? And as I mentioned earlier, the Romans they were one of the first people to introduce realism into portraiture. Right? Okay, and and we can see it here, that if you look at the heads, the busts, as well as the sculpture of the patrician, okay, you can see that, they are trying to capture their individual likenesses. Okay? And on the right is actually a famous work by Dominico Galandeo. Okay? Galandeo, I believe, was the teacher of Michelangelo. Okay, and here is, you see here an old man and his grandson. Okay, and now this portrait, now if you look at the old man carefully, you look at his nose. He's suffering from a disease called rhinofever. Okay, that caused the disfigurement and the growth in his nose. Right? But judging by their clothes, okay, they wear a matching kind of, in terms of the color, right? Judging by their clothes, we can tell that they, both of them belong, to the aristocracy, right? But I think this portrait has been suspected by some to be a posthumous portrait. Okay, meaning to say that it was done after the old man has died. Okay, in fact, they found another drawing which actually showed the old man, seemingly dying, right? Okay, so that was thought to be a study for this. Okay, but anyway, this was thought to be a posthumous portrait. Okay, but I think, and the family who commissioned this portrait wants this old man to be shown in a positive light, right? To show his beneficence, to show his warmth, okay, as a person, right? So here, and that is why some people suspected that the grandson, now, we are not even sure whether that's a grandson, okay, that this particular let's say it's a little boy, okay, was actually included in this narrative just to make that kind of, to provide a contrast, not only to provide a contrast, but to establish the intimacy between this old man and the little boy, okay? And in that way also to express the old man's own kind of beneficence, right? Okay, his, as a person. Right? Now the window you see there with the landscape, now that's a device also used by Renaissance artists, and it's actually a device borrowed from Flemish artists in the north. Okay. Okay, as a visual record, okay, much like a family portrait, and this famous painting again was it's actually a wall painting, right, taken from a house in Pompeii. Okay, Pompeii and Herculaneum were two of the cities that were buried in 79 AD by the Mount Vesuvius, when Mount Vesuvius erupted. Okay, so many of the houses are preserved, and in some of these houses you'll find portraits. Many of these houses have paintings anyway. Okay, and some of them have actually portraits of couples. Okay, like this here. So this is considered to be a marriage portrait. Now, how do you know it's a marriage portrait? Okay, because they actually carry certain things. You can see that on the left, the man is carrying a scroll. On the right, the lady is carrying a stylus and a tablet. Okay, so those were actually considered to be objects that, it led some to believe that it was actually a portrait, commissioned to commemorate their marriage. Okay, it's like what we do today to have our photographs taken. newlyweds, right? They would dress in their best costume, and after that, that's it, just one time. Okay, it's the same here in this case, right? And this painting is famous, remarkable for its expressive realism, okay, and for individualized details. Okay, although we can see that, the couple here, they don't seem very confident. Okay, they look a bit awkward, right? In fact, the lady don't even meet our gaze, although the man kind of, look at us, but in a rather hesitant way, I suppose. Okay, but unfortunately, this couple would have perished, okay, when Mount Vesuvius erupted, okay, in 79 AD. Okay, unfortunately. As political propaganda, okay, again, this is probably the most reproduced photograph. Okay, I'm talking about the one on the left. Okay, the photograph taken by Alberto Corda. Okay, and Alberto Corda was a Cuban photographer. Okay, who was in the circle of Fidel Castro, and Che Guevara. He's a photograph of Che Guevara. Che Guevara was, of course, the famed, or the infamous, you call it, guerrilla fighter, who fought in the Cuban Revolution, and who eventually served with Castro in his government, and who was eventually captured by the Bolivian army and executed. Okay, so this photograph was taken during a memorial to commemorate victims of a bomb. Okay, and some suspected that that bomb was planted by the CIA and all that. Okay, the anti-Castro kind of forces. Okay, now when it was taken, actually the full photograph actually shows more than just this. It actually shows a palm tree on the right and another figure on the left. Okay, but what Corda had done is that he cropped the picture. Okay, so what we have here is just like the portrait of Che Guevara. Okay, and it has become, a timeless portrait. Okay, and Corda commented that, what he sees here in this portrait is the stoic resolve of Che Guevara. He was able to capture that kind of stoic resolve, okay, very well in this photograph. Okay, and he didn't kind of put any copyright to this image, because he said that he wanted the revolutionary ideals of Che Guevara to be propagated, to be circulated. Okay, and later on, of course, this photograph was appropriated by an American artist called Jim Fitzpatrick, okay, who reproduced this in a poster format. Okay, at that time in the 60s, it was the psychedelic 60s, right? So here he uses psychedelic colors as well, okay, for this kind of reproduction of Che Guevara, of Alberto Corda's image of Che Guevara. Okay, and I think it's through Fitzpatrick's work. I mean, they are more or less similar, both works, okay, with slight differences. Okay, but it was actually through Fitzpatrick's work that this image began to be, propagated even more. Okay, through reproductions of T-shirts, coffee mugs, etc. Okay, it became etched in the popular consciousness. Right, it became a symbol of anti-establishment forces. Right, okay, even today. Okay, and it didn't end there. Right, okay, in 2008, there's this artist called Shepard Fairey, okay, who obviously was inspired by Fitzpatrick's, okay, poster of Che Guevara, and here he did one of Obama, and it became an integral part of the 2008 presidential campaign. Okay, and it would not be far-fetched to say that, well, it did play a role in helping Obama to be re-elected. Right? Was it elected or re-elected? 2008. Re-elected. Oh, elected. Sorry, elected. Okay. And he actually first designed this poster rather independently. Okay, and later on, it had the approval of the Obama camp. Okay, and I think then it began to be circulated widely, right, through the social media and all that. Okay, it started to become viral, or to go viral. Okay, and here, he has done on the right, that's Obama's photograph on the left. Okay, Obama on the right. And he did several variations. I mean, at least in the text. Okay, so there's one that's called Hope, another one called Progress. Okay, I think there are one or two others. Okay, and the colors itself, right, kind of resembles the color of the US flag, right, the red, the blue. Okay, and he said that, well, he wanted to do an image of Obama, right, because he wanted to capture the power and sincerity of Obama's speech, okay, in an image. Okay, so he saw that in Obama, the qualities, and he wanted to capture that, okay, with this image here. Right? But actually, this image was itself based on a photograph taken by an AP photographer. Right? Okay, but anyway, interestingly, what happened was that Shepard Fairey himself went to court to prove that he did not plagiarize, okay, from the original photograph. All right? Okay, but later on he was actually charged in court for trying to destroy some documents. Okay? So, as I said, the face, the portrait can be an important factor in politics. I think there was one experiment done where a fictional election was arranged. Okay, and people were asked to vote. Okay, and they actually put a face there of the candidate. And for another candidate, they didn't have the face, just, I think, the name. And when the election results came out, it was no surprise. Okay, the person with the poster with the face of the candidate shown won the most votes. Okay, so you can see how, the face itself can make an impact, right, especially in politics. Okay, talking about politics, this is it looks like a dandy-looking individual, but it's actually a king. One of the most, powerful kings, in France, Louis XIV. Okay, by Hyacinthe Rigaud, right? And this portrait really has come to symbolize, the absolute monarchist. Okay, and is able to capture the pomp and circumstance of royalty. Okay, I mean, all the attributes of royalty can be seen here. Okay, you can see the column, the massive column in the background. And the column has always been present in portraits of kings as a symbol of grandeur and power. Okay, and what you call the curtain as well, right, in the background. Okay, not to mention the scepter, the fleur-de-lis patterns. Okay, you can see the fleur-de-lis patterns. That's a royal symbol, right, on the costume of the king, right, on the covering on the left as well. Okay, and then you see the king wearing a wig. Okay, and he has part of his costume folded up to expose his leg. Okay, making him look quite sexy. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, and what more? You have red high heel shoes. Okay, that he's wearing. Do you notice that? Okay. Right now, how do we account for the high heel shoes? That the king was rather short. Okay, so some people kind of believe that was to compensate for his height. Okay, but the stockings and all that, that was actually fashionable at that time. Okay, so it's nothing. He's not a cross-dresser or anything like that. Okay, it's just part of the royal kind of costume. Okay. But it's really a frank demonstration of power, right? This portrait itself, as I said, okay, it's a demonstration of pomp and circumstance, right? Okay, and self-portraits. Self-portrait itself is a subject in itself. Okay, there's so many things that can be said about a self-portrait. Okay, and I included these two artists, Rembrandt and Van Gogh, because they are two of the historically most prolific self-portraitist. If you look at Rembrandt, okay, let me talk briefly about Rembrandt. Now Rembrandt, he did self-portraits both in paintings, oil paint, as well as in etchings, right, prints. Okay, and those of his etchings actually show him studying a range of human expression. Right, so his etchings actually show a range of human expression, probably to help him in his paintings. Okay, but his oil paints, right, show him serve as a kind of autobiographical record. Okay, and probably Rembrandt wanted it to be wanted it to serve that purpose, to show his changing appearance, right, over the years. Okay, so we have records of Rembrandt from when he was in his 20s, all the way to when he was in his 60s. Okay, and it actually also showed his changing fortunes, and it shows you how the appearance of a person can actually change with, over the years with changing fortunes. And in some of his paintings, he liked to role play. Okay, he liked to role play, and in fact he spent a lot of money on the props. Okay, he would buy props, right, to be used, for self-portraits like this. Okay, in this case, he was trying to dress up as like an Ottoman Sultan, okay, with his dog, right? So here you see the artist trying to project a desirable image of the self, right? Okay, he's trying to project a desirable image of the self, right? And on the right, Van Gogh. Okay, now Van Gogh, he did also as many self-portraits as Rembrandt. Any reason why he did so many self-portraits? Any reason? What do you all think? Why did he do so many self-portraits? Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. He was suspected to have suffered from schizophrenia. Okay.
Maybe it was a manifestation.
Yeah, that's possible. Okay, but it's believed that he did so many self-portraits simply because he couldn't afford a model. Yeah, it was a practical reason, right? So what better way, what cheaper way to do it than to paint yourself, right? But if you look at all his self-portraits, there's always a disturbing quality. Right? As you said, he was suffering from certain mental illness, okay, probably from schizophrenia. Okay, and there's always something disturbing in his portrait, and it's quite psychologically powerful in the sense that he was able to capture his own interior reality. He's not trying to capture his physical appearance, okay, but something deeper. Okay, and I think he was able to do that. Okay, and that also was helped by his technique. Okay, his technique of very broad, vigorous brushstrokes. Okay, that adds to the kind of the disturbing quality of his paintings, of his self-portraits. Okay. Then we have group portraits. Okay, and and on the left, now group portraits are a bit more challenging to paint than a single portrait, of course. Okay, because not only have you got to be able to capture the group, but the skilled group portraitist is able to capture the individuality of each member in the group. And I think there's no artist who was able to do that better than Rembrandt. Okay, on the left, and if you compare Dutch portraits, group portraits at that time, many of the group portraits are just showing people standing there in a very static, rigid manner. Okay, but Rembrandt here introduced drama into his group portraits. Okay, so here you have an anatomy lesson taking place. Okay, and at that time in the Netherlands, I think probably in other parts of Europe as well, okay, you could have, only once a year, you could have what you call a public autopsy being done. Okay, but I think this particular work is actually staged. It was commissioned, okay, by probably the Doctors Guild or something. Because Malaysia companies and guilds, they will commission portraits to be done. Much like company photographs today, right? So this was probably staged. And, but then again, if you look at it, Rembrandt was able to capture the individual likenesses of each member, okay, of this portrait, while retaining the unity of the group as a whole. Okay, and here we see the corpse there. Okay, and the corpses are normally corpses of criminals, executed criminals, right? And so you see here Dr. Nicholas Taub, okay, trying to, do a certain demonstration to his student, right? And if you look at the corpse, his tendons and muscles have been exposed, okay? And at the far corner there, you see a large kind of, probably a medical treatise. And if you look at the faces of the so-called trainees or probably trainee doctors, okay, you see that some of them are looking at the medical treatise, some of them are looking at the corpse, others are meeting our gaze. Okay, so you can see how Rembrandt was able to introduce drama into this work. Okay, not only through the composition of this work, but through the use of chiaroscuro, light and dark, okay, to convey that drama, right, in this work. On the right, you also have an equally skilled portraitist in Titian, okay, who was also able to capture the character, right, and personality of his subjects. And I think he's able to do it very well here in this group portrait of the Pope, Paul III, and his grandsons. Duke. One was a Duke, Ottavio, on the right, and the other is a cardinal. Okay, Alessandro Farnese on the left. Okay. Now, if you look at the Duke, right, now the Duke is stooping to talk to the Pope. Probably the Pope is hard of hearing, so he has to stoop to talk to the Pope. And in a very referential way, he has his right hand on his, on his body, and then his left hand is holding the sheath of his sword. Okay, and he approaches the Pope in a reverential way. Okay, and one will only try to guess what they are talking about. Okay, because some people, if you look at the Pope, some people read cunningness, slyness into the Pope. Okay, and some people, when they look at the Duke Ottavio's pose and the way that he stoops down to, to whisper something to the Pope, okay, some actually brands him as a scheming conspirator. Okay, but sometimes we have a tendency to read too much into it, into a portrait, and we have to be careful about that. Okay, too much into the character. Okay, but another convention of portraiture is this. Okay, if you look at the two grandsons, who do you think is closest to the Pope? Okay, and who do you think is closest to the Pope? Is it the one on the left, the cardinal? The one on the right, the Duke? Some of you think the one on the right. No? Okay, why do you think? Okay, anyway, if you look, one clue is this, okay? The cardinal is holding the, what do you call that? The backrest of the throne of the Pope. That's a clue. And it signifies that he's the one who is the closest confidant of the Pope. Okay? Right? So you're able to tell, even by, by such kind of signifier, right? Who's actually closest to the Pope. Okay, two more to go. Okay, that's it. You bear with me. Okay, and okay, this is a work by. Have you all seen this work? This is quite a famous work as well. Contemporary work by Morimura. Okay, called Portrait, and I think there's a Japanese work called Futago. It's actually a Japanese word for twins. Okay, why is it called twins? Because this image actually was based on, right, this image by this famous work by Manet called Olympia. Okay, and as you know, this painting itself caused a lot of controversy. Okay, allegedly shows, it's a reclining nude, but allegedly shows a prostitute. Okay, I'm waiting for a client. Okay, and then you have a black servant there carrying a bouquet of flowers, probably again from a client. And then on the right, you have a black cat. Okay, it was controversial at that time, right? Because it didn't show a pagan goddess. It actually shows an actual person, Victorian, a model, okay, who used to model a lot for many. Okay, but anyway, coming back to this work. Okay, so Morimura sort of appropriates the painting of Manet. Okay, but this work is not a painting; it's actually a photograph. Okay, and he manipulated it in such a way that he's being shown here both as the nude itself and the black servant. Okay, that's both, the artist playing both roles. Okay, and here, of course, he's wearing a wig. Okay, and now what is this work about? Okay, it's really about, I would say, identities. Okay, here, Morimura is trying to warn us against the deceptiveness of appearances. Okay, that both gender as well as racial identities can be artificially constructed. Okay, and he's, that's what he's trying to do here. He's trying to destabilize the fixed notion of, of male and female, for example. Okay, so here you have Morimura, although he's trying to wear a wig, a blonde wig, trying to disguise himself to make him look like a woman, okay, at the same time he lacks the physical attribute of a woman, like the breast. Okay, although, his left hand is now quite interesting. If you look at the left hand in the original painting, okay, the left hand is used to impart a certain modesty to the figure, okay, by covering the genitalia area. But here, the left hand has taken on a new meaning, significance, in trying to conceal the truth of his masculinity. Okay, but even then, he couldn't hide his masculinity. Okay, right? So really, here he's talking about, he's exploring identities, and he's telling us how in contemporary society that identities are not fixed. Okay, but again, it's always in a flux. Right? That could be one reading of this work. Okay, finally, this work by Shirin Nashad. Quite a famous work. Okay, now this work is taken from the Woman of Allah series, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, in this particular series, she has done portraits of herself. Some of them are self-portraits, others are portraits of other women, normally shown in the kind of a hijab or burqa, wearing a hijab or burqa, and sometimes carrying firearms like this. Okay. Now, Shirin Nashad is an Iranian artist, but she doesn't live in Iran. In fact, after the Iranian Revolution in 1979, she was barred from entering Iran. Okay, so she's actually a diasporic artist. Okay, and as a diasporic artist, you are actually able to comment, seen from the outside, you're able to comment on, what's happening in Iran. Okay, so she's able to comment on the role of women in Islamic society, right? Okay, she's able to comment on how Islam is being perceived by the outside world. Okay, so this work, what she has here is that you have this woman here wearing a hijab or a burqa. She's carrying a firearm, and the firearm sort of divides her face into two halves. And she has written on her face some poetry. Okay, in fact, Nashad was inspired by feminist poetry as well. Okay, so what is this work about? Okay, firstly, it's a commentary on the role of women in Islamic society. Okay, it's about the perception from the outside world of what Islam is. Okay, because today we read a lot about the controversies surrounding the wearing of the hijab. Okay, especially in Western countries. Okay, and it's through this controversy that it is also how we perceive Islam. Okay, normally in a negative light. Right? And we also associate Islam these days with Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism. Okay, especially today when, you have all the war in Syria and all that, okay, happening. Right? Okay, so she wanted to question that perception, our perception of Islam itself. And another thing, the second reading of this work, of course, is how her kind of how women are being treated in Islamic society itself. Okay, so by kind of writing the words of this, the poetry on the face of, the subject here, she's questioning the role of woman. That many times, the voice of the woman is actually silenced in Islamic society. Okay, so she's talking about, again, the role of woman as well in Islamic society, and probably about the kind of the suppression of woman's voice in Islamic society. Okay, so that could be another reading of this work. All right, so I've ended my talk. So in conclusion, I hope I've given you some insights about what a portrait is. That a portrait is not so much about likeness, but it's about other things. It's about capturing the inner character, about conveying status and wealth, and so there are many other functions of a portrait than just capturing the likeness of a person. Okay, thank you.